Can we discuss some of your more motorsport experiences? How was it going to Le Mans for the first time, and why that race?
Le Mans for me had always been the holy grail. I'd loved the cars from the races. I'd liked the whole idea of the race. It sort of, I don't know quite why even, but it just held something for me that again, perhaps a throwback. My dad had been there filming, and I'd seen a lot of film about it, but even as I'd grown up, there'd been more Le Mans history, whether it was Steve McQueen and that sort of era. The Bentley, obviously. I'd read a lot about it. I think because of my dad and his library, a lot of Bentley books there. And the guy who helped look after my dad's car was a man called Wally Saunders, who was actually one of the original riding mechanics for Bentley. So there was a real connection there, which was part of it. And I'd always had it in the back of my mind, once I'd started motor racing, that, you know, I'd like to eventually get there. And I sort of planned in a way that I'd maybe sort of after, I don't know, I'd given myself quite a long time to sort of work my way up to it.
Yes.
And then what happened was that in 1979, I'd still only really raced small vintage cars. Bertelli, who was the original, not the original, he was the owner of Aston Martin in the 20s and 30s. And he'd come to the workshop and visited the workshop, and we've got some lovely pictures of him looking at the cars. But he sadly died, and there was a memorial service for him. And this was, must have been the end of 78, I think, perhaps.
Right.
And I was at this service, and a man called Brian Jocelyn, English sort of journalist and enthusiast, came up to me and he said, would you be interested in going to Le Mans? And I went, I beg your pardon.
Yes.
He said, well, we've got a little outfit called Dorset Racing, and we run a 2-litre Leyland, and we need another driver, and you'd have to contribute to the cost, and it'd be £3,000. And I went, oh well, no, I'm not really ready for this. And then at the same time, it became clear that we were going to be in France all that year because of we were recording.
Yes.
And I went, I'm not, you know, I can't do this. And they went, oh, of course you can. It's not that difficult. You just get in a car and tootle round, you know, like an idiot. I went, oh, all right then.
So they probably gave you the 2 a.m. stint or something like that, did they?
No, they were brilliant. They were really helpful. I mean, we had a day testing, a seat fitting, and
yes.
They said, you know, the first few times you go around, lift for the kink and Mulsanne, and then you'll gradually get into it.
Yeah.
And they were right. And it was so sort of easy and relaxed. I'd had so many stories from other people about being pushed and
yes.
what hard work it could be.
Yes.
And I just loved it, and I drove it. They gave me as much practice time as they could.
Yes.
And they sent me out in daylight. In fact, just before dusk, which is a lovely time to go because the air's beginning to cool down, and so the car's going really nicely, and it's easier to see the stuff that's coming up behind you because they've got their lights on, which is, because otherwise you're really nervous about being in the wrong place. So I thought, well, at the end of that, we finished the race. I mean, of course, I didn't realise just how difficult that can be. So I thought I won't say it was easy, but I thought, yeah, this is great. And so we went back the next year, and I stayed with Dorset, and I still got the car, in fact.
It must be quite daunting, though, to be in a car, as you say, going down the Mulsanne in the middle of the night, knowing that you've got the likes of a Tom Christensen or an Alan McNish or a Vern Shubin or whoever.
Well, actually, you had Jackie Hicks.
Well, Jackie Hicks, yeah.
Derek Bell.
And you know they're not going to give you any quarter, you know.
But having said that, I mean, I have to say, someone like Derek was fantastic because 2 years later we were at the Nürburgring and running the BMW, the M1. And Derek was the man who said, okay, I'll show you the way around. And spent really, 4 or 5 hours, well, 3 or 4 hours anyway.
Yes.
Actually driving me round and then sitting beside me and saying, this is what happens here and that's what happens here and so on. And that is invaluable.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fine if you're Nicky Lauda and you learn a circuit in about 3 laps, but somewhere like that, it's if I'd had to do it on my own, I'd still be there now.
Yeah. Well, Chris Amon, I recall telling me once that it was the one place that he still knows every gear change, every corner, because you just couldn't afford to get it wrong.
Absolutely.
And I guess that was on the original circuit. Slightly changed from how it is now.
Yeah, now
certainly a daunting circuit. More daunting than Le Mans, do you feel?
Oh yes, because Le Mans has quite a lot of. Le Mans was particularly daunting because of the Mulsanne, because you've just got such a speed up and you've seen some of the accidents that have happened there. But basically, of course, in a downforce era, the faster you're going, the more grip you're getting.
Yes.
So actually, it's pushing something like a 956 is actually in some ways easier than a lot of older cars, because just the speed gives you the grip. But the Nürburgring, first of all, there's things like the Flugplatz where the car goes light anyway, and then you've got the Fuchsroll where you're going downhill, and you can see all these trees. I mean, there's not many circuits these days that have trees either side.
No, indeed. Just to wrap up on motorsport, into the Red, you talk about the most terrifying car you'd ever experienced at that time, which was a 1950s Indy car.
Yeah.
It had 2 gears, no brakes to speak of, an extraordinary driving position, very poor suspension. And
apart from that, it was perfect.
Apart from that, it's perfect. Yes. This is the car you discovered afterward that Fangio refused to drive after a number of practice laps.
Yeah.
How can we talk more about that? That must have been quite an astounding experience for you.
Well, it was entirely my own fault, of course, because I thought the car looked
the car
great.
you really wanted, wasn't it?
Yeah, I went to enormous trouble to bring it back from. It was in pieces, I think, when I bought it, and we restored it and got it running and everything else. And then I actually climbed in it, and I just thought, this is not. This feels terrible.
Yeah.
And I should have known better, really, because it was, it was up against a 250F Maserati, which I've got, and I know just what a wonderful car that is. So it was a car that was on the transfer list fairly shortly afterwards. But I think as you say, if Fangio didn't like it, how on earth would I like it?
Your passion for cars is quite extraordinary, and I guess, do you still have a dream car? Is there still something there? Do you still have a dream drive that you'd love to do?
Not really, because I think everything is sort of part of the picture so it's always great to drive other things, and I mean, in many ways the Audi drive, the Auto Union drive was a sort of ultimate drive. I'd love to drive one of the Mercedes Grand Prix cars. I'd say, would I really like to drive a modern Formula One car? I think it would be almost more difficult to do justice to that and get very much feedback than it would from the Auto Union. So I'm not crazy to do that. I think it's more to do with the fact that I think as I get older, there's more chance of modifying the collection to reflect what I'd like to do with it. And it's probably a matter of almost dividing it, not dividing it, but I think there's probably cars that I'd be very happy for the kids to carry on racing. And I'm fortunate now that one of my daughters did the decent thing and married a professional driver. So we've got that on board, which is helpful.
Lovely, yes.
We've got an open invitation to him that I'm going to fund his racing career. But
I take it you haven't quite thrown him the keys to the Villeneuve car and said, "Oh look."
He's driven it.
Has he?
He's great in the car. I mean, he's a lovely driver, actually.
Have you sorry to ask, but have you driven it?
Which, the Villeneuve car? Oh God, yes.
And?
I love it. It's fantastic. Well, the great thing about it is that about something like that is that a Formula One car that was made for someone who's half my size. Well, if you own the car, you can get in it. True. Whatever it takes.
Because you hear a lot of people who bought like the Mansell cars and the Prost cars, and who just simply can't. They bought the cars, but they just simply can't fit into the cars.
You can fit into it usually because if you just take the seat out and remake the seat or make a much thinner seat. But the Villeneuve car, absolutely, he obviously had the fitted seat in.
Sure.
But the great thing with that car, one of the nicest things, was a few years ago when we took the car to Goodwood, and Jacques drove it.
Yes.
And that was really moving,
Yes.
really lovely.
It would have been, yeah. Last question, sad to say, but could you ever imagine a world without cars?
I think there could be a world without roads and cars as we know them today, but I think and hope, a bit like Jurassic Park, that people would still want, in the way that we'd all really still like to see a dinosaur in the zoo.
Yeah.
I think there'll still be a complete fascination. The same way we're still fascinated with steam trains and old trams and all of that. I think that it'll be a long time before the car is completely dead. I mean, there'll obviously be different sorts of hybrids and different methods of making cars work.
Sure.
But I think we're still some way away from Star Trek sort of matter transfer systems.
Thank you very much for that.
Pleasure.